Calamari for dinner?
I've travelled the world far and wide in order to find some of the best TV shows and films. I've searched diligently, and I can conclude that what I ended up loving was right in front of my face the entire time because this is so popular, and for great reason. Okay, so the Invincible animated TV show has blown me away, and I thought what better time than now to do a breakdown. I'll be honest, I thought I was done with superheroes. After watching Avengers Endgame, I kind of fell down a rabbit hole of anything that wasn't superhero related, and I'm kind of glad because I don't think I've missed too much.
Can you see me?
But my interest returned after catching up with The Boys. The TV show, not the lads down Weatherspoons. See, this idea of flawed superheroes has been experimented with so much recently. It's not to say we've never had this before, but we are seeing so much more violence, and a lot of people resonated with how raw the story is, since you're subverting all the usual superhero tropes. And when it comes to Invincible, there seems to be this perfect balance between heroic feats, emotion, and like introspection.
It's about time.
And I guess the slightest, just absolute slightest touch of violence, but it's not really there, so you barely notice it. Is this the first move all the Viltrumites learn in fight school? Because I'm genuinely curious. Just grabbing someone by the back of their head and finding the nearest source of life to turn into custard. For the record, I haven't seen the Invincible comics, and I don't want to spoil myself because I'm so invested in the series, but I hear the comics are phenomenal, and this whole series has been long overdue. It was actually biding its time on Simon Pegg's t-shirt. Something which makes superheroes popular is despite their extraordinary circumstances, they still have to deal with everyday things. It's the relatability of everything else they have going on in their lives which gives the story weight and higher stakes, and it can connect to global audiences because people kind of, to an extent, understand. If you are enjoying this video so far, maybe consider subscribing. It means a lot. Spider-Man is the first hero I think of when it comes to relatability, and it shows in Spider-Man's popularity because, you know, people can kind of get Peter Parker's situation.
I don't know what kind of mind game this is, but I'm the real Spider-Man.
What Invincible has, which is a huge advantage as a TV show, is time. And time is a valuable thing in storytelling. You have to use it cleverly, and more often than not it gets misused, especially in feature films. This is the secret genius of Invincible's writing because we get an opportunity to explore each and every character and watch them develop.
Dad saved us from the Flaxons, but he went into one of their portals.
Oh. So he'll be late for dinner?
Now that season 3 is done, I can definitely say that there isn't a single character I dislike in this series. I mean, maybe there's a few. And yeah, Cecil's character's awesome, despite him making some of the dumbest decisions I've ever seen. What really ties this show together and what brings all these elements into one amazing package is the voice acting. I mean, the actors have done an unbelievable job, and this is just a testament to, if you pay for quality, you're gonna get something good out of it.
Kind of like peeing your pants on purpose.
What?
Peeing your pants on purpose. You know, you spend your whole life trying not to pee your pants.
Masterpiece. I used to not be a fan of Rex. I found him really obnoxious and annoying, and then I realised, wait, that's actually the point. And then he becomes self-aware of the type of person he is, and I don't think I've ever seen anything where the characters are so self-aware of their flaws. And the beauty of time is allowing them to realise that about themselves and then giving them the opportunity to fix things or sink even lower into their own psyche. Every character in this story has problems, some bigger than others. But without flawed characters, you have an empty husk of a story. The duality of Omniman, or Nolan, is one of the coolest things I've ever seen because it's keeping your attention. As I was watching it throughout the show, half of me wanted him to rectify his actions, and then the other half of me is concerned that he's going to just flip out again, which he's certainly capable of doing because he's well established to us that he is someone we cannot trust as an audience.
Or are you gonna be on my fucking time?
I'm gonna be on your time.
Nolan is such a fascinating character because he's constantly teetering on on the edge of his newfound compassion which he learned from his family on Earth, and at the same time he's battling his unyielding duty which derives from his biological tie to the Viltrumites and their cause for universal dominance. Nolan is effectively the extreme version of what someone like Superman would be had he not been raised with a sense of kindness. That's why when Nolan says that one single line about missing his wife, it's so much more powerful than it should be, but it's amazing because that is a complete psychological shift in his character. It's an end to a certain arc, and all he has ever known throughout his entire life is destruction and competitiveness and power. And to think his mind has now changed to something so simple, so average, something that's human level, which he's partially ashamed of having, he's now growing to accept. It's no mystery that when you have the initial antagonist of the series be part of the protagonist's family, it can open the doors to countless emotional and narrative arcs. Nolan's arc isn't just about redemption, but also about whether redemption is even possible. I mean, we saw what he did, okay, let's not beat around the bush here. He took a lot of lives in a very, very messed up way. The question is always, does Nolan actually love Mark, or does he see him as some kind of investment? And over time, I think we see that Mark, alongside Nolan's other kids, they mean a lot more to him than he would initially put on. Unless there's something about the comic books I'm not aware of, and there's some kid who he treated really badly, okay? I don't know. I honestly don't know. Don't spoil it in the comments for me. I want to experience it firsthand. Seeing Mark develop is what gives the story credence, because his perspective is constantly changing. There's internal battles across all of the characters. Like Donald, for instance, who low-key becomes one of the fan favourites. He basically becomes a Terminator. Donald's one of those characters where if he was in any other story, he would have been surface level. You wouldn't have cared about him. He'd be a blank slate. He'd just kind of be there. But in Invincible, whilst all the other characters are fighting monsters, babysitting, or getting it on in the bedroom, we have a guy who's going through an existential crisis. And the sad part is he has Cecil to look out for him, which is, unfortunate. Why can't more stories do this, man? They made one of the most unassuming people into a huge part of Mark's journey. Even some of the most obscure side characters make a cameo, they return back into the story, because you can see that people get affected over the duration, even people who don't get any lines. These details are one of those things where you don't appreciate it until you get it, and then you realize, wow, this is actually there's so much effort put into this. Even the elephant is given time to shine, I say shine, he gets the shit beaten out of him in every scene. He doesn't get beaten as much as a mortal though. Bro's entire existence is to be a crash test dummy. It mocks the idea of power levels, for instance, which is a constant thing in this story. A lot of people are divided about the show's animation. Some people say it's bland and it doesn't hold up to the comics. A lot of people just aren't happy about the fact that there's very little dynamic movement in most of the scenes, whilst other people are very content with how the show looks. Now, I personally hate the animation of this show. I wish it looked exactly like the comic books. I wish it looked identical to it. I wish it looked a bit more like how Studio Mappa does their animation. It's not hard to do, okay? Animation is not hard. You just need to keep the animators in their studios for all eternity. No drink, no food, and you have to make sure they do every single in-between frame of Mark floating in the air for every single episode. There's a saying written by the ancient Greek philosopher Aurelius Dingleberry in his book The Extremely Old Republic, and it states, "Don't get lost in the source." See, what Aurelius Dingleberry meant by this was, would you rather have animators be overworked and have a terrible quality of life, potentially starving in their studios, dying and suffering just to push out that beautiful Sakuga everybody so desperately wants? Or would you rather the animators be healthy and happy and have great mental health and, selectively making fantastic animation alongside holding down a brilliant story on a consistent basis? Well, I know what I'm choosing. Fight scenes, baby! Flashing colours, visual stimulation. What I love about animation is when it's used sparingly for the scenes that require it, it can actually hit much harder than if it was consistently overwhelming. And even then, the scenes that don't have a ridiculous amount of dynamic movement involved still look really good. And at that point, they'll usually put more emphasis on the emotions of characters. Mark's mum, for example, goes through all sorts of shit, and you can see it in her appearance. One of the most iconic scenes in this story so far is when Nolan fights the Guardians. To me, the brutality of this scene and his fight with Mark hits so much harder because of the immediate shift in detail and gore. It emphasizes the tonal change as opposed to the show looking constantly detailed throughout every single second, which is not necessary. It's a technique which has been used for years to intentionally exaggerate something. Like in the certified classic, SpongeBob.
Even my bags have bags!
I mean, come on, even the show mocked its own animation in season 2. You want another example of how the tone changes? Just listen to the sound design. It helps find a balance with the animation too, because right now the show is coming out on a fairly consistent basis. You know, despite a gap here and there, that's completely fine. Invincible explores the pressures of heroism and the complexities of morality across all types of fictional species. I'd say that's the central theme of the story. A lot of superhero stories are very clear-cut, good versus evil, but Mark is thrown into a world where power comes with ridiculous challenges. The show definitely doesn't shy away from the brutal realities of power. It reaches the point where power becomes a burden for Mark, and you really see him start to break down towards the end of season 3, to the point where he wants to prioritize watching over Eve because he's so sick and tired of having to be the only person who can realistically protect the planet. And I love that he hates this position, because I think anyone in his situation would feel the exact same way. Just getting beaten up constantly, dealing with big brain boys, you know.
And don't do drugs.
Would they even work on me?
You do not need to find out.
It's really hard to write a relatable protagonist given Mark's situation, but the way the story has reflected what's happened over the past events in Mark's demeanor shows constant development. He's not this one-dimensional character, he's not simplistic, he can't just smile through the pain and crack on with it, you know, he's going to suffer multiple times. Nolan and the Viltrum Empire embodies this conflict, you know, the desire for raw power, and that's perfectly encapsulated with Conquest. And I love his monologue when he leans down next to Mark, because he realizes he has nothing to live for except power, just working across the universe, slaughtering people, and he's tired of it, but he's good at it. And that's exactly what Nolan wants to avoid becoming. Or at least that's what he's slowly figuring out to avoid becoming. But it completely flips the script from what we believe is right to what the Viltrumites believe is right. You know, it's a completely different perspective and worldview. And that worldview forces Mark to question whether strength and power alone defines a good and righteous hero. Mark's trauma is unfortunately a huge part of the story, and it's incredibly necessary. He's constantly getting physically and emotionally destroyed, and it's interesting to compare this to other comic book heroes because the catalyst of the story is completely based on how characters react to hardship. I mean, think of Batman, for example, you know, how does Batman react to things given he's someone who doesn't even have powers? Although he has a ridiculous amount of money. But the quality of the story comes from seeing how this character, how Batman maneuvers around the problem, and it's the same thing with Mark, just slightly different powers. I can't wait to watch the next season. You know, that global response to the last episode of season 3, the ratings are through the roof, it's one of the highest rated episodes in TV history now, for very good reason. It's garnered a reaction not many stories can achieve, so it's a testament to how important writing is. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please consider subscribing because it means a lot. Check out my other videos and take care.